are live. So welcome to Rebel Road Career Stories. Today I am delighted to have joining me Paul Reynolds. Thank you, Paul, for joining me.
Nice to see you. Great to be here.
So Paul is a seasoned farmer leader and currently VP Head of Marketing for Galapagos. We did cross over at GSK briefly. I think we made an introduction at ERS, a fleeting introduction, but
Sounds familiar. I did 11 ERS.
Probably spent, yeah, exactly. I know. Imagine. I just remember. I think you put the other day about clocking up some miles at Congress. I think it's probably the furthest I've ever walked in a time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I've been following your posts on LinkedIn since that time, I think, and actually I'm always looking forward to seeing what you're posting next. So I knew when I decided to do the career stories, I knew that you're one of the people I wanted to reach out to. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. Great to have the opportunity.
Awesome. So today we're going to look at some of your awesome insights and look at your career, because you've been working in pharma for some time now, and you've had a fantastic career. So where did it all start?
Well, it didn't start in pharma. I suppose that's the first lesson. So I've worked for about 30 years, of which 20 of it is in pharmaceuticals. And the first 10, I suppose when I came out of my degree doing marketing, I took the wrong door. So I turned left and ended up in local government for 5 years and then went on to work for central government.
Oh, wow.
Which is not the direction that I chose to take. And there's a lot of lessons in that. But about 20 years ago, I ended up starting with Novartis. And actually, I started as an internal auditor, which is not how most marketeers start. But again, that was a result almost of the prior life. So I did an MBA to sort of rejuvenate my skills and my brain. And that was enough to entice the pharma industry to bring me in. So I did 3 years of international auditing for Novartis, and at the end of it, their natural decision was to say, do you want to work in finance?
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately what I was doing. However, that wasn't what I wanted to do. I did a degree in marketing and never really used it. So I said I wanted to go into brand marketing, and that's the start of the journey, really. So for the last 17, 18 years, I've been working through a succession of roles at Novartis. Local, national, and a little bit of global, and then into Glaxo, which was mostly global, and then regional, and back to national. Then Allergan, which was international, and now I find myself in Galapagos, a small biotech, Belgian biotech, which is truly global, but with no team. So all sizes, all dresses, all different things over the last 20 years. But I suppose one thread has always been marketing, because it's the thing that I love to do. So there's lots of lessons and twists and turns in that story.
Yeah. So what's helped you then, now kind of reflecting back on it, how have you kind of progressed your career?
So I suppose it started very linear. So at Novartis, when I decided to move out of senior auditing into marketing, I followed the classic path: sales, new product introduction, business partner, doing forecasting and analytics. Then I did a launch. So that was a very linear route. Then I went into deep R&D at Glaxo. And I think probably a lesson is that I then stopped following a linear path. And I think this is very important. I bounced between global, then regional, then national, back to regional, maybe a bit of global again. And so I've gone up and down the strata of, I suppose, strategic marketing, which means that I've never got bored, and also I've never got, I suppose, tired or old-fashioned in my outlook. I was always trying to rejuvenate and regenerate my own marketing self. And so that meant every 2 to 3 years, there was always a jump coming, which I suppose I fueled. So as soon as I got comfortable in, say, a regional role, I would then go back into global. Then, of course, you start to show that you're not, you haven't got a relationship back to national marketing, because that's moved on 4 years. And then I moved back to national. So I think by continually jumping around, it meant that you continually refresh your skill base and you don't become known as one thing.
Yeah. So then how did you drive that forward? So every couple of years you're changing roles. How did you create those opportunities, or how did you get in front of the right people?
Well, I suppose there was always a destination. So the destination was, in my brain was, I wanted to run a franchise or I wanted to be a general manager. And it didn't matter which one. Ultimately, they were both a driving factor. So any job that would help me on the journey to that was a relevant step. So after 2 years of, for example, European marketing, to be back into global, I needed to widen out my franchise experience. So then I started working in Asia Pacific and also started working in Latin America. So that started to allow me to then move towards the franchise role. Then knowing that was cooking well, then I went, for example, worked in Poland, because by working in Poland for 2 years, I was truly immersing myself in a different environment. And I was also then traveling towards being a general manager, because there I was a business unit director running half the business. So I suppose it's been a succession of top-ups. Yes, I could have then gone on to be a small market GM, but then I had an opportunity to be an international marketeer with Allergan, and I jumped again. So there's always been a thread. There's always been a thread ultimately to becoming a general manager. I've never achieved that, but I've achieved the global marketing role that I've always wanted by adding piece after piece after piece in roles and then reinforcing it. Because I suppose if anybody interviews me and says, well, why do you want the role? What qualifies you for it? They're looking to see, has this person got good operational experience? I think time in Poland, time in the UK fulfills that. Has this person got credible international and global experience? Well, I've got a succession of different exposures which add together to make me credible in that role. And that seems to be credible enough for Galapagos to employ me this year to take on what is the build out globally of their franchise for fibrosis.
And I think that's interesting that you said you're getting kind of clear on the end, kind of clear on that end goal. You've got a couple of options in your end goal, but looking at the opportunities as just that kind of the growth and the learning to get you a step closer.
And I think you can go very fast, and you might achieve your dream job as the next opportunity, or you can continually top up your skill and move towards it. So I think for me, that was the way I kept myself inspired, which was to constantly pursue your dream, because being senior marketing, like being a VP of marketing, is a dream job for me. I really, there's not many mornings I don't get up and think, wow, I'm pretty lucky to do what I love doing. But you just don't fixate on it, just keep on working towards it. And for me, it's something that I finally got to, and it now means I can jump down back into a general manager role if I want to, or I can switch onto other franchises. So, just keep doing what you love.
So who or what has helped you then during your career?
Okay, so I suppose is always the case. I mean, most people say there was a teacher that they admired at school that put them on the right course. I've probably had a succession of good bosses who've been very good counsel. So they looked at me as an individual, not just as their subordinate. And I've had that at Glaxo, I had that at Novartis, and I've been very lucky to have that at Allergan. So those individuals, I think, also help you look beyond the job that you want to do next or the job you're in. I think I always counsel, if I speak to anybody about their career decisions or where they think they want to work, is always to think, well, where does that lead and where does that lead? You should be thinking 3 jobs ahead, not 1 job ahead. And that doesn't mean that you start to become disloyal to the next opportunity. But if you don't ultimately know where you're going, you can make a false step. So for me, I had a couple of great bosses at Glaxo who sort of said, well, where's this all leading, Paul? And I think for me, it was the general manager, and it was this idea of a franchise head. So by having this vision that was several grades and several roles away, they told me, well, then look about what things do you need to complete to be a more fuller offer to the organization. So don't think about it's all got to be complete in the next role. Think about the experiences that start to complete you as an individual. Have you run a big team? Have you worked in a foreign country? Have you done a launch? Have you done an early phase commercialization? Have you thought about big strategy or operational strategy? Have you worked with sales teams? So they sort of give you a menu that you start to work through, and that can't be worked through in a single job.
Yeah.
It needs several experiences to complete it.
Yeah.
And that, I wouldn't say it slows you down, but it starts to give you a very solid groundwork on which you can develop yourself.
Yeah. So you're starting to know where you're going, but it's looking at getting clear on that kind of future goal, where you're going, but actually closing the learning gaps. And actually that could be a couple of different roles, ultimately getting you where you want to go. Yeah.
And I suppose you could say they're the what's. And then, of course, you've got the hows. So the hows are where they look at you as an individual. And again, I've been lucky that I've had bosses who've either let me have some coaching time, which has been really good. Not mentoring time, but coaching time, where people really look at you and say, let's look at your developmental areas, look at your strengths. I've had quite a few 360s done. You can never have enough 360s. 360s give you I suppose, a brutal assessment of yourself. And if you don't recognize yourself in a 360, then you probably got a bigger problem than you know. So I've had several 360s over the last few years, and they're really good for race tuning. So ultimately you get to a certain level of, I suppose, maturity as a senior leader, and you should be fully self-aware of where you're good and where you still need to practice. So by doing that every few years, and then soundboarding that off a good coach, the likelihood is that you're going to be able to put to bed those areas that you know deeply are your, and I know we never talk about flaws, but they are flaws because they're parts of your psyche as an individual in business that crack when the organization puts pressure on you. So if you recognize them, you can repair them and you can strengthen them, and then they add to your strengths, and then you become a more complete leader. So lots of what's, lots of jobs, lots of experiences that give you a playbook, which means that you can use those in any organization, and then lots of techniques and learnings about yourself as an individual. That's the powerful cohesion that allows you to grow as a person in business.
I think that's so key, actually, because I think that self-awareness is gold, and it's not, because I think that when we naturally go into our comfort zones, or we naturally try and follow our strengths, but actually we've all got those gaps. We've all got the less comfortable areas, or I talk about my derailers. I know that in times of stress I become quite analytical, but actually that's not my strength. So actually to get out of it, I need to take action, which is my strength. So but actually knowing that about myself, it means that, when you are under pressure and you do default to those other areas, you can pull yourself out. But it's that self-awareness is key.
Well, every step up you take in your career typically puts you under a renewed pressure, because ultimately your responsibility grows, the level of tasks you do goes bigger. So no matter how strong you believe you are as an individual, as you take the next step up, those strengths and those flaws or those development areas become exposed again. So constantly studying how you're growing as an individual, or maybe you recognize where you don't grow, is really, really beneficial. So there's certain things I know. I look at myself, I have my devil on one shoulder and my angel on the other, and I understand when each of them operates. And thankfully the devil gets smaller and the angel gets bigger as you get older. You'll know they're there, and you still know that they throw you into irrational activity when you're under pressure. And just knowing it actually allows you to power through it and to demonstrate to your team and others that you can control the situation and you can do a great job for you and your team. But that, self-consciousness without becoming, mad worrying about it is really important.
So I work a lot with leaders who are going into new leadership roles. So that kind of first 6 months when you're going through that really growth period, what would you say are some of your hot tips on how to navigate that? Because you've made quite a few transitions.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I suppose the place that I learned most was in Poland. So I walked into a very different culture, and I thought I understood everything. So very honestly, I think I went in there like a bull in a china shop. And for the first 3 months in running the Polish team, and I had a huge team at that time. I went from a team of 3 to a team of 250.
Oh my goodness.
So huge spectrum of and that was again one of those learning experiences about how could this guy run a large team. And I suppose I was second guessing it. And I had a colleague at the time who stood back and took more time assessing not only the team, the market, the products, and really took a long, and I thought this guy was not slow, but I thought, why aren't you triggering activity? Why aren't you moving forward? And when he finally acted, he acted with great precision, great panache, great skill, and his team understood the dynamics of his decisions. And I think at the same time, my first decisions sometimes were landing incorrectly because I'd gone straight in fast.
Yeah.
So I think that when you're in a role first 6 months, don't feel pressure to act.
Yeah.
Feel your job is to collect insight for you to make the right decisions rather than to rush at it, because that's where you'll find 6 months is exhausted by making the wrong decisions too quickly.
Yeah, and I think that is the biggest pitfall, because especially if you're going in a leadership capacity, is that there's such value in listening and observing, and actually that builds credibility with your new team. But actually, if you go in and think you have all the answers, things can.
I think if your team, I suppose in Poland, because it was quite an authoritarian top-down culture. I thought there was an expectation that I had to make fast decisions. For me, that was showing leadership to them. And for a few months, it got me a lot of credit, because people were saying, this is an action guy. He's straight on it. He's making decisions. Fantastic. But those decisions, in some cases, didn't have strong foundations. So what does an organization want from you? It wants you to be thoughtful. It wants you to ask lots of questions. As you go up, you solve less things, but you ask more questions.
Yeah, I like that.
The goal is to question the organisation, and when the organisation gives you enough answers, you can make a decision. So in those first months, don't feel pressurised to jump to impress anybody, because it's likely you're going to make false conclusions until you really understood the problem that you've entered and the business and how you're going to solve it. Because that's ultimately what we're always doing in business. We're solving issues or problems, or we're trying to put solutions on the table that the organisation, is presented by.
Yeah. So we spoke earlier about, just bringing your authentic self to work and life. How did you get comfortable with who you are as a leader?
So again, two sides. I think first of all, doing the 360s, and I did Insight a few times, and seeing a score that was familiar and similar, both Paul the person and Paul the leader. That was quite good, because it reinforced the fact that I could be successful and authentic. So that's one side. So I get sort of scores told me you're doing all right.
Yeah.
The second piece was I also had a year of coaching. Now this was, I think they used to have Job Plus coaches at GlaxoSmithKline, and a good colleague of mine went through my career aspirations with me and really recognised that I was saying one thing and doing another.
Right.
So I was, I wanted to be promoted, I wanted to be ambitious, I wanted to move on in the organisation, and he said everything you say to me is not continuous and not consistent with what you're really trying to do. So the ambition was overpowering the route to get there.
Okay.
So that was very useful, because he said you need to act and say, you need to be the same person to get the future that you want. Because at the moment, if you talk to me, I'm hearing two individuals I'm hearing the guy who's super ambitious, and I hear the real Paul. So for me, that was a very big learning about being more authentic about what I wanted, being explicit and open about it, and also recognizing that the answer might come back that I wasn't going to get what I wanted, and therefore I needed to fix how to get there.
So first of all, kind of getting clear on what you want. Yeah.
Clear on what you want, clear on your likelihood to get it, and if you then get disappointed, not to be disingenuous about the road to fix it. So for me, and again, the rule was I was fixating on job title. Very simple. Aspiration for me was always to be a vice president. And it didn't matter if it was vice president of paper clips. It was a fixation on a job title. And one of my bosses at the time said, stop worrying about what you're called and worry about what you're doing and who you're doing it with. He said, when you get those two things to collide correctly, you'll get what you want in terms of ambition. Just stop. And that was the trouble, was somebody would say to me, I've got a great job, Paul, would you be interested in doing it? If you didn't have the magic letters of vice president or general manager, I was disregarding it.
Yeah.
That was not authentic, because I wasn't expressing why I didn't want the job. I wasn't listening about the job. I was listening to it didn't have the right job title. So I think the biggest thing that ever happened to me was giving up on that and just saying, let's do what I really want to do.
Yeah.
And by luck or by judgment, I'm now a vice president, which is wonderful. So I got the magic letters, but I've earned them, I suppose. There's the difference.
Yeah. But you can even hear, when you're talking so passionately about it. But that seems like it was quite a pivotal point.
It was a big moment because the road was closed the way I was trying to travel it.
Yeah.
If I was fixated on the job title, I couldn't authentically get the job, because every time I come at it, the ambition was overriding the skills and the way in which I needed to demonstrate my competency to do it. So as soon as I let it go, and somebody then offered me another role, which was a director role, but it was the job I'd always wanted to do, which was to run a franchise at Allergan. And when that job came up, and I said, well, damn the VP, just get on and do something I really love. You know what? 3 years later, it all came true, and I got promoted because I was exercising my skill, because I was passionate about what I was doing, and the organization recognized that I was the right man for the job, rather than trying to make my CV fit a role that I wasn't ready for. Yeah. So that was so you asked what was the influence on that. It was a great couple of great bosses that taught me down. It was me looking at myself in things like 360s. It was a bit of external coaching. I'm probably getting a bit older and starting to work out what was more important for my long-term prosperity and my long-term happiness as a marketeer, my pure blood. That's the thing I love doing. And when I got that out of my system, it all went perfectly. Yeah. So it's just clear that bit out, because it was getting in the way. It was getting in the way of actually achieving what it was I was trying to achieve.
There's probably that's so much pressure as well, when you're focused on something.
On me, and it's me putting the pressure on me, not my wife or my family or my colleagues. Because a lot of other people, you make a great vice president, we'd love you to have me. And you think, wow, yeah, great, let's do it. Your peers aren't the person who's going to put you in the job. You've got to convince senior leaders that you're competent, that you're calm, cool, that you're ready. And if you're rushing it and you're becoming fixated on the conversation you think they want to hear, you're not being authentic. So it's all in there. It's a melting pot of maturity. You've got to grow up and realize that there's a better way to get there.
Yeah, and then but the journey, then you're doing more of what you love doing, so actually the journey to ultimately get to where you are now.
It gets easier because, of course, you're now following something that you're passionate about. Every day you prove to the organisation that you're competent. The organisation looks at you in a different light, because they start going, oh, wow, this guy was a bit of a hidden gem. What happened here? And suddenly you start to rise up, because your competency is displayed all the time, rather than trying to engineer that when you're not ready. And I wasn't ready. I mean, that's it. You look back now and I think I wouldn't have been ready if I'd taken the big role. I probably wouldn't have been successful in it, because I think I wanted it more than I knew how to do it.
Yeah. So possibly wouldn't have enjoyed it, as well, because you'd be like, oh, maybe this isn't all that I've been dreaming of,
Yeah, there was a classic, there's a quote, isn't there? I want to be the leader, I want to be the leader, I want to be the leader, you're the leader, now what do I do?
Yeah.
So you can't be in that position. When somebody says you are now in charge, you've got to be competent. Otherwise you'll fail. So hopefully I've not failed. And I suppose what I've done is I've had a warm up after warm up after warm up, and the organisation has bought into me as I've taken those steps. So it's been a very enjoyable journey. Once I gave up trying to be promoted, I got promoted. Yeah,
and actually be yourself and do what you love and be yourself. I mean, how better way to do it is actually just by doing it the natural way, but actually being yourself, And I think I see so many people, who are, we have this comparisonitis, we compare ourselves to others, it can be quite draining. I work a lot with burnt out leaders, and quite often it's exhausting trying to be someone else, but actually, it's just
that's a great point.
you
Because
know?
I think the danger is as well, you always have a cohort. Wherever you work somewhere for 10 years, you have a cohort of individuals that start in the same place as you do. And over time, they get promoted or they leave or whatever. But ultimately, you start to measure yourself versus them. So you think, why is it that John or Sally or whatever has now got to the role that I think I deserve? That's a very dangerous set of assumptions. This isn't a comparison of individuals. They've got there because probably they've had more maturity. They've looked at how they're operating and that they've adjusted their style to be, I suppose, promotable. And you can look at it and be bitter about it and go, well, that guy wasn't good enough or she wasn't good enough. Or you go and fix it, which you learn by how they got promoted and put into roles that they then thrived in. And that's the point, is don't get bitter, because that doesn't get you anywhere.
No, exactly. No. And I always love that saying, you know, just stay in your own lane, because I think it, you know, just focus on you and your journey, you know, where you're going, and put your energy into that. You know, it's good to take inspiration, you know, from others, but if it's having a negative impact on you, then you've got to let it go.
And I think you make a good point, because you think, you know, I go to the airport every bloody week. And it's like you get to the passport control and there's 6 queues and you think jump queues, and you always know when you jump queues that the queue you were in goes faster than the one you come. And it's exactly the same in your career, is stick to your plan. Stick to a plan and think about how you're progressing, and you know that things take time. So if you jump the queue, in all likelihood, it will not deliver you further on and faster on than you were where you started. So it's be committed to the lane you're in. Okay, sometimes things go wrong, but ultimately you're better in the lane you started in, finish that experience, and then ready to move on to the next role or the next task. Too often I see a lot of CVs at the moment, you know, starting a new business with Galapagos. There's lots of, we look at CVs all the time because we're building a team. And you see people who jump too quickly. They jump, and they come up and they go, wow, look at all my jobs. And you go, yeah, but you never finished any of them. You know, yes, you've said you've done 5 things. It's magnificent. But did you ever do one of those things twice? And then they look at you and go, well, no, because I was moving fast. And you go, well, yeah, but I need you to have learned and at least done it once and twice really starts to strengthen you, because you now know in the second year what you didn't know in the first.
And how to build on that. What you're learning from any mistakes you've potentially made, you know.
So in most of my roles, I didn't stay years in any role, but typically 2 to 3 years. 2 to 3 years means your first year you make all your mistakes, the second year you repair those mistakes, and the third year you're awesome, because you've got 2 years of race.
We all need that. We all need that awesome year, don't we? You know? And
that's normally when you start to feel awesome. For me, it's time to go, because ultimately I've realised that in that experience, I'm sort of, I think I've learned as much as I could learn, and it's time to go and jump into some deeper water again and feel the learning curve again. And for me, that's a constant. My wife despairs of me because I'm constantly swimming out into deeper water every time it feels comfortable, because that's what I love doing. I love being slightly out of my depth, and then swimming into safe waters, being reassured, and then I'm back out again.
And she's got a beer on the stand.
Ways for me to swim in again, and like, you're back now, and you're not stressed anymore, and you know, it's a natural rhythm for me, and that's just what I love doing.
I like that you actually, you know, when you talk about 3 years, you know, that year of kind of making mistakes and trying things, fixing it, learning, and then being awesome. I mean, I like that that's realistic, because you do see a lot of people who are right, you know, okay, I'm 6 months in, 12 months in, and they're already looking, but actually you're still learning, you know, it can take a year just to go through that learning curve, and then, you know.
And I think in most of the businesses that we run in is an annual cycle. Now that annual cycle evolves, so nothing's ever the same in year 2, but my playbook now that I can go back to, and the playbook is from Novartis, it's from Glaxo, it's from Allergan. The elements of the playbook are not from the first year, they're from the second year and the third year, because that's when you sit down and go, I saw this problem before. and this is how we solved it, or we don't need to worry about this, or we really need to worry about this because this is where it all went wrong, or this is where it all went right. And I think the danger of having lots of short 6-9 month experiences is you never really saw the end of what you started. So you never really know if you fix something or whether you damage something, because equally we all make bad decisions and we make good decisions. And I think for me, when I talk to the organisation in today, there are as many lessons about things I'd never do again as there are lessons about things that I would definitely do again. So, you know, I get people say, "What have you thought about this?" And I go, "Guys, don't do that because we did that and it was a disaster. Let's try this." "Oh, okay, let's do that." So that comes with not years of experience, but lots of little sets of years of experience. It's not that you have to be 45 or 50 to be an expert. You just need to have practiced enough to have got good at something.
And that's it. It's interesting because you say it's learning from the mistakes. I think I do see a lot of leaders these days who are maybe a bit scared to make decisions at the risk of failing, you know, but we don't really talk so openly about I don't like calling them failures, but you know, those learning moments, you know, we don't really talk so openly about them, but sometimes that's where often you learn the most.
But we would always, if I think about ever getting, for example, a group of countries together to talk about, I don't know what, a launch or something, as valuable as best practice sharing, which to be honest is a bit cliche and a bit overused, if you tell them to do worst practice sharing, it's electric. Because when you ask them to say, well, what was it you'd never do again? What was toxic in your launch plan? Then you cut off something that ultimately will destroy value for others. So a mix of the two is a very nice place to be, and to be very open to people to come in and say, we tried this, we burnt a load of money, or we wasted months and it never worked. Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. It's no reflection on you as an individual. You took a risk.
Exactly.
And we can openly discuss as a team that risk doesn't play out the way you'd hoped it would. So let's avoid doing it again.
Yeah, exactly. Now you've prevented others from doing doing the same. Yeah, exactly. So
worst practice sharing, I think I wouldn't necessarily do a whole section on it because it can be a little bit depressing, but it certainly is inspiring when a group is allowed to talk openly about mistakes that have been made, because if we stop a mistake, it's gold. It's gold. It's not that virally affecting an organisation as other people try it in other countries, for example.
So tell me a little bit about your current role, because you've gone from working for a huge, big corporate pharma to now working on the other end of the
Yeah, so I work for
employees now.
Yeah, it's a logical sort of step. Again, I'm back in the deep water. What am I doing? So Galapagos is a biotech. It's a very successful biotech discovery house, and it's a very successful development house. It's successfully sold assets onto partners. The difference now is that they're going to go on and create a biopharmaceutical company. So they're going to create a mid-sized company that actually takes products all the way from the laboratory right through to patients. And my job and a couple of other members of the commercial team is to create that organization. So how does it relate to everything I've done before? Well, I've never worked in an organization before that has no structure. We have no countries. We have no national infrastructure. We have a very small commercial footprint. So we need to put in place a pharma company. Now, the joy of that means we're a company that takes risks, thinks differently about how we're going to operate. We're known as the make it happeners.
I love it. Love it.
Happen, which means make a decision, do it, reflect on it. If it works, keep going. If it doesn't work, doesn't matter. Stop and come back and replenish and do something. So the nice thing about the role is, whilst it's very scary having no infrastructure, it's also extremely exhilarating because we can put everything in the way in which we would want to put it in when we look back at our playbook. How would we want a pharmaceutical company to be? What teams would we put in? What type of people would we put in? Where would we put those teams? Where would we borrow resource or rent it? Where would we own it and put our own people in? And that's the journey we're on. So it's a blueprint for a pharma company. So
that's so exciting. It's awesome because you don't get those opportunities that often.
No. there's been a number of biotechs that have started in recent years and they've gone through the journey. We're on another journey and we'll do it slightly different to them. So that's the interesting part. So we're looking at the moment, one by one, for like-minded individuals to come on this magical mystery tour as we educate an organization that is really successful at defining targets and developing proteins and bringing drugs through to phase 2. And then as we move into the later phases, that's where their experience starts to run out. And our job is to get that company to be just as proficient as discovery as it is at launch. Yeah. So it's a huge opportunity. The job is about doing what I've learned to do, but more importantly, it's about educating an organization on what they need to do and be. So every time I have an idea, I always say it's a 3-step. So I have a great idea. I need to educate the organization that great idea is something that they should do, and then we commit to do it. In most jobs, you have a great idea, you do it. So the education piece in the middle is where it's exhausting, but also massively rewarding, because you're learning all the time that the organization commits to your idea and says, let's do it. Or they look at you and say, what are you on about? So it's exhausting because you're going through this constant learning cycle, enticing the organization to commit to do something that you know they probably need to do, but they've never come across it before. Yeah. So that's my day, week after week after week. And I already look back, I've been there now since June, there's already little signs of green shoots where ideas were implanted, they've taken growth, and they are now starting to grow as we start to put, I suppose, elements of an infrastructure into place that will then be there forever. So that's, you're starting to see your footprints. It's really important.
That's awesome. So you said something about that learning period. I think we don't really appreciate that when we're going through learning and growth, that it can be exhausting on us personally, because so we don't kind of take a step back to think about how it's impacting us. How do you get work and life working together? How, so that you're not overwhelmed or not burning out, with all this going on?
It's a good question, because I think the way to think about the organization, and it's not, I don't want to be disparaging, but if you imagine having when I've got two children, and when they're small, if children just ask why all the time, why? They never just accept an answer. They want to know why. Why is the sky blue? Why is grass green? And if you don't explain it to them, they then continue to ask why. So I'm in an organization, and it's not saying that it's infantile, but an organization that doesn't know what it doesn't know. So it will continue to ask why until it's satisfied. And when it's satisfied with the answer, we move forward. So that is exhausting. So how do I manage as an individual? Well, I have a pretty heavy travel agenda because I commute. I stay in the UK half the week, and I spend half the week with the team, either in the Netherlands or in Belgium. So that creates a dimension of travel on top of an organization that is demanding because it's constantly learning. So I think you have to switch off. You have to have moments where you're with it, and there have to be moments where you walk away. Now, I suppose I love what I do, so that's also helpful, because if you do a job you love, I don't think you work. Yeah. I go to play with Galapagos every day.
I love that.
So that straight away changes the dimension of how much tax is put on me as an individual when I love what I do. So I suppose the biggest issue is making sure that what I love doing doesn't take over everything I love doing. Yeah. So I've got a lovely family, I've got hobbies, and I've got friends. And I think the measure is trying to get some balance between those other demands on my time, and it's making sure that there are people who demand your time apart from your job. And I find too many people who allow the other elements of their life to be relegated. And I always think, if you haven't got a hobby, get one. If you haven't got friends, go find some. You know what I mean? And spend time with them, because they bring you back to what isn't work. So, and then you find that there's balance. Am I 50-50 balance for work? No. I would say that work takes 60%, if not more, of my attention. But 40% for me is healthy.
Yeah.
It's enough. My family are very happy with that. They also get me more time at home. When I'm away, I'm away. When I'm at home, I'm at home. So there's all those different balances, checks and balances, but make sure you do many things that you love, and they will distract you from it becoming one thing, which is work.
Yeah. And I think I think it's so important, because I think it is too easy, and I see a lot of high achievers going all in to work.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that are burning out, and and so often they've lost that connection with themselves and things outside of work. But actually having all those elements of life, it means you can bring your best self to work. And
well, you think you will never tell yourself that you're working too hard.
Yeah.
There's not going to be a conversation with yourself on a Friday night saying you worked too hard this week, Paul. Whereas my wife will say that, my children will say that, my friends will say that, and the hobbies that I pursue will say that when I'm not there.
Yeah.
Because they'll keep saying, we're not seeing you, it's not enough. And so I'm not saying that it comes out of them telling me that I'm not there enough, but I have enough tests that keep reminding me that I've let that 60% become 70% or 80%. So they also know that I love my job. So I'm enjoying myself with Galapagos. We have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it's also important that fun ends, and there is also fun with everything else that matters in my life.
Yeah.
And the good news is I have an employer that's very flexible, and if that needs to be 40, 60 the other way, they're not going to be on my back to say, well, we're not seeing enough of you, Paul. So I think it does need a flexible employer, but it starts with yourself, because you will work more and more hours without any self-check or balance. You have to make sure that you realize that there are other things that are as important, if not more important, in your life than what you do for a job.
And that's a really good point. I think a lot of people relinquish the power they have to shape work and life and make it work. I think often it's like, oh no, my work's taking over. But actually, when you take a step back and challenge yourself to set boundaries, or to inject more life, and we do have a lot of power to shape that, but quite often we relinquish it.
I think I like to put a lot of energy into my job. So that's different to putting a lot of time into your job. I do work hard, but my job takes a lot of energy, but I give it a lot of energy, and that energy moves things forward. I think there's like the statistical element of how many hours a week do I invest. The thing to watch out for is how much energy you invest in your role, because you can be with your family 50-50. Absolutely, I'm with my family 50-50, but my energy expressed into my job is 80-90%. So if you're giving 10% energy to your family and 50% of your time, you're not a lot of use to anybody.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of temper how much energy you invest in your job versus what you invest in the other things that are equally important. And there are weeks when my wife will know, for example, my kids know, it's a big energy week. Last week at ERS, we had 5 days on the road in Paris. I gave it everything I had. I came home and I'm literally spent because I've given it everything. I can't do that week after week after week. There's nothing to give then to my family. So this week is a week of reparation, and the balance is tipping the other way this week, which is the energy goes back into my family.
Yeah.
And I suppose, so balance doesn't have to be Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, 50-50. What it needs to be is you need to realize when you're going to give a lot of energy to work, and when you're going to give a lot of energy to your family or to your friends or to your whatever your passions. So be conscious of that.
And I love that, looking at energy versus time.
Yes.
Because actually I think that we are so fixated on the 9 to 5 or whatever that looks like all the time, but actually if you start to look at things from high energy weeks and low energy weeks, and then,
and it's being conscious of it, because if you have a bad weekend, the likelihood is, if your partner or your wife or husband or your children start to say, well, you're not the person you should be, the likelihood is that the previous week you gave all your energy to your work. So if you're conscious of that, you then have an ability to manage it. But if you keep giving Monday to Friday all your energy, yes, you could say, well, my weekends are free of email, I don't talk to my colleagues, I don't look at my work, but there's not a lot left.
I know.
So you need to create balance in what energy is invested in both parts of your life.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So I think that's us coming to the end of time. I could keep talking and talking and talking. You've got loads of awesome insights, and I'm so glad that you agreed to do this. The beer's on me.
Thank you.
So thank you again for joining me today. And